to see all of these supportive folks here, supportive of our honors program. We really appreciate you. I think I know just about everyone in here, but I'm Dr. Cook, the coordinator of the honors program this year. Our esteemed coordinator from last year, Ms. Wilbur. We really appreciate seeing her face, as well as some of our students who graduated last year. Really happy to see all of you. So thank you all for supporting. We're going to get started, so we make sure we have plenty of time. We have two presenters today. Our first one will be Jareth Woodson, talking about the infectious origins, uncovering the role of parasites and viruses in schizophrenia. So I will get out of the way. I should give one more shout out to Professor Landis, who has mentored so kindly and graciously both presenters today. Thank you so much.
I think with our general media intake today, we all have certain notions as to what schizophrenia is. Many of you may have heard the joke, I used to be schizophrenic, but we're all better now. This is of course rooted in an old conflation between dissociative identity disorder and schizophrenia. The goal of this capstone was to look into the possibility that viruses and parasites may have something to do with the development of schizophrenia. So today we're going to be looking at what effect viruses have on schizophrenia, the maternal immune system, its reaction to infection, and in turn the results that these immune responses have on a developing child and the relation to schizophrenia. We're also going to look at parasites, one parasite in particular. In fact, it's one that some of you may have swimming in your head right now as you're sitting there. You may be wondering about the identity of the man on the screen. What you're looking at is the first in a series of self-portraits by artist Brian Charnley. Charnley was schizophrenic and weaned himself off his medication during these portraits. He was advised to keep a diary explaining the imagery in the portraits. Over the course of the series, he gives an intimate look into the experiences of his symptoms, and I include him a few times in this presentation so as to provide a human face for the disorder. So schizophrenia is a recurring neurodevelopmental disorder that affects approximately 1% of the population. Symptoms usually present around adolescence. These symptoms can be divided into two categories, positive and negative. Positive symptoms are something added to a person's behavior and thoughts that typically aren't present in most people. These would include hallucinations, delusions, disorganized speech, frequent derailment, or incoherence, and grossly disorganized or catatonic behavior. If positive symptoms add to behavior, we can view negative symptoms as a lack or removal of something we'd expect in normal behavior. These include indifference to what would normally be considered pleasurable activities, such as eating, sex, indifference to social interactions, the relative absence of speech, brief replies possibly because the subject can't organize their thoughts in order to converse, and a lack of emotional expressions. Even though the individual does feel the emotion, they don't present the emotion. And diagnostic requires at least two positive symptoms, at least one of which must be delusions, hallucinations, or disorganized speech. The disturbance must last for at least 6 months, and if the individual is on the autism spectrum or has a communication disorder, they must have hallucinations or prominent delusions. In the diary associated with the portrait behind me, Charnley writes, "Come back to 1 to 3 milligram tablet of Depixol with temazepam tablets to get some sleep. Very paranoid. The person upstairs was reading my mind and speaking back to me to keep me in a sort of ego crucifixion. I felt this was because I was discharging very strong vibrations which could easily be interpreted. I tried to express this in the painting. The large rabbit ear is because I was confused and extremely sensitive to human voices like a wild animal. I also felt I was being read generally by ESP. I'd come back to 1 tablet of Depixol on 17th of April 1991 and was just now beginning to feel the dramatic effects of such a sudden withdrawal." So, onward, what is a parasite? When we talk about parasites, what we're generally referring to is a relationship descriptor. Perhaps some of you have experiences with parasitic relationships. But as an operative term, we're defining as an organism living in or on a host and deriving nutrients at the host's expense. Tapeworms, ticks, and cordyceps fungi, or zombie fungi, are good examples of this. Under this definition, there is nothing more parasitic than a virus. In fact, viruses are intracellular parasites, bits of DNA or RNA encased in a protein. Simply put, they're rogue genetic material that needs a host in order to reproduce. Because of its nature, there is a degree of coevolution at play, wherein the host's immune system acts as selective pressure for a given virus. So speaking of selective pressure, when we think of schizophrenia, it's natural to wonder why it has, given the stigma associated with its symptoms, been selected against as a trait. The answer to that, as a rule, schizophrenia is selected against, but there are factors that mitigate the selection. These include de novo mutations, or new mutations, pleiotropy, where a single gene does multiple things. Sickle cell anemia is a good example of this, as it can not only cause sickle cell anemia, but depending on the prevalence of the gene, it provides protection from malaria. So viruses and schizophrenia, we're going to look specifically at maternal immunity, genetic susceptibility, and its effect on neurodevelopment. Imagine you get a cut. After the bleeding stops, you'll notice there's a swelling and redness. What you're looking at is inflammation caused by proteins sent by your immune system. We need such reactions if we're to live healthy lives, but in pregnant women, there are studies that show that such immune responses lead to abnormal neurodevelopment in the fetus. Some of these inflammatory proteins have been associated with schizophrenia, including IL-6 and TNF, or tumor necrosis factor, the latter of which causes cell apoptosis or programmed cell death. IL-6 is also confirmed to be able to cross the placental barrier. Another consideration is that when the mother's immune system is activated and the body begins to produce these inflammatory proteins, it decreases the production of placental enzymes. These enzymes regulate fetal exposure to glucocorticoids, which normally affect placental growth and fetal development, but fetal placental exposure can lead to abnormalities. Earlier this month, a paper was published showing a gene common in Finnish populations that modifies antiviral tolerance by causing mitochondrial dysfunction. Furthermore, there also seems to be a genetic basis for astrocytic anomalies in schizophrenia, tentatively pointing to an upregulation of astrocytic gene expression, mostly in cortical areas in the brain. These areas tend to be associated with language, thinking, and creating new ideas. And speaking of astrocytes, these astrocytes make up the majority of cells within the central nervous system and have several functions. The context that we're concerned about involve the role in homeostasis, which is just making sure that everything hums along in status quo, synaptic regulation, and synaptic remodeling. So astrocytes are also the primary cell type that synthesizes glutamate, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter important in memory and cognition. Abnormalities in glutamate levels have been demonstrated in schizophrenia and related disorders. Schizophrenia is associated with reduced prefrontal gray matter volume as well as decreased synaptic density and hyperconnectivity in different brain networks. So some areas are more connected, far more than they should be, whereas others have less connection. And this may connect with the mechanism behind hallucinations exhibited in schizophrenia, or in the area most affected during hallucination is called Broca's area, which is involved in speech production, rather than what we would think to be language comprehension. Based on this, it would seem that in these cases the individual is hearing their own thoughts and voices, but are unable to discern it as separate from the voices that are around them. The researchers infected groups of mice with H1N1 vaccine antigen and T. gondii antigen, both of which elicited an immune response within mothers. Various results occurred depending on the intensity of infection as well as the stage of development the pups were in. Infection at stage E9, that is to say embryonic day 9, resulted in reduced spatial awareness in adult pups, whereas infection occurring at E17 resulted in repetitive behavior such as in autism spectrum disorder, and OCD. And parasites, we're going to specifically look at Toxoplasma gondii, its life cycle, its effects on schizophrenia, as well as dopamine production. Toxoplasma gondii is a single-celled organism, protozoa to be more specific, according to the National Institute of Health. It's estimated that about 1/3 of the population is already infected. So roughly about maybe that third of the room. Including roughly 8 to 22% of the U.S. population. It is capable of infecting just about any warm-blooded animal, but its only known definite host are cats. And there are behavioral changes associated with T. gondii infection. Usually a higher impulsivity in males and higher impulsiveness in females. Or excuse me, aggression in females. And it's like cats shed the oocytes, you can think of these as eggs, in their feces. These tend to infect rodents and the cat's other prey, wherein tissue cysts form, often in the brain. And this gives the cats an advantage because it muddles the prey's cognitive abilities, making the prey easier to catch. Of course, the cycle loops in this case. The cat is further infected and unharmed so long as its immune system remains robust. Note the red circle here. Now, animals have a distinct habit of using the facilities wherever they please. This results in the potential for more than just birds and mice and cats to be infected by T. gondii. In fact, humans can become infected from tainted meat, water, soil, in addition to just litter boxes. This normally doesn't pose a big issue because our immune system keeps T. gondii in check, but risk occurs if the individual has a weakened immune system or is pregnant, in which case toxoplasmosis becomes a potential threat. According to one meta-analysis, and note these are cysts that occur within the tissue cysts in the brain. According to one meta-analysis of 66 studies and 11,540 patients, 2/3 of the studies analyzed showed a positive correlation between toxoplasmosis and schizophrenia. However, studies were omitted where the mother was seropositive for toxoplasmosis and the child turned out to be schizophrenic. While children were positive for toxoplasma antibodies in their blood, these studies were omitted because further testing needed to be done to confirm whether the children were congenitally infected or whether they were infected by their mother during her pregnancy. The same meta-analysis advocated for treating schizophrenics who are seropositive with toxoplasmosis with high-grade toxoplasmosis medication, as there seem to be positive results with lesser quality medication, implying that the tissue cysts in the brain exacerbate schizophrenia symptoms. As mentioned, when we were discussing viruses of maternal immune activation, there seems to be evidence for and against T. gondii playing a role in mood disorders, but this could be a matter of when the infection occurs during neurodevelopment. There is a correlation to Toxoplasma gondii and dopamine. When T. gondii converts from a tachyocyte to a bradiocyte, amino acids encoded within its genome activate, allowing it to synthesize dopamine. When dopamine is constantly present, more T. gondii tachyzoites are present, denoting worse infection. In these cases, dopamine antagonizers have been implemented. However, dopamine levels did not change with statistical significance. It should be noted that T. gondii infection has also been shown to alter astrocyte function, which we have shown to be associated with schizophrenia. Complications. In going through the literature regarding schizophrenia, the term heterogeneity was implemented quite a bit. This was regarding the variety of possible symptoms that can occur and points to a need to drill down diagnostic criteria where schizophrenia is concerned. This need is where genetics should come into play. Our current data is far from perfect, however. The data is skewed more towards European genetics, and genetic susceptibility seems to reflect individual constellations of symptoms. Researchers in China have started to develop a model for narrowing down potential genes based on protein interactions, which could certainly help pin down candidate genes. The downside is that heterogeneous constellation of symptoms would still need to be taken into account. It is also suggested that schizophrenia and other neurodevelopmental disorders be arranged on a continuum alongside autism spectrum and intellectual disability based on common genetic mutations that these disorders share. What you're looking at now is the second to last portrait in the self-portrait series. This one did not have a description. This one and the last one didn't. You'll notice, however, though, an increasing a dissociation of the self as well that the artist felt. So to sum things up, viruses and parasites do have illicit immune response in expecting mothers, correlation between immune response and interplay with genetics complicates our ability to understand these mechanisms. We know that there is a correlation between infection and schizophrenia, but we don't have the individual specific mechanisms pinned down. References. And are there any questions? Yes.
What are treatments for T-Gonda infection?
T-Gondy, I would not antibiotic. Well, specifically, there are medications. I don't know why, in the case of schizophrenia, there aren't why they aren't prescribed higher dose medications. That's one area that seemed just out of range of this particular project. But there are medications as far as that goes. If generally, like I said, 1/3 of the population is infected, but it doesn't seem to really cause any problems, except in certain cases where there are ocular diseases, things like that, in which case you'd have to talk to your doctor and get medication for it.
Okay, I have a few questions, but the most obvious question is, so was that cat video you played? Was that a cat that had been infected by this?
Sometimes a cat is a cat.
There was no introduction to that. Okay, second question. So can I ask what led you to like going down this path and investigating kind of this relationship between this disease and
Between
Yes.
schizophrenia and viruses?
yes?
Well, originally, this was the result of narrowing down our scope. One of the topics I originally was interested in was whether or not there was a molecular and cellular basis for personality. And I think you and me both agreed, Professor Landis, that that was a bit large for a semester-long project. And so I think we brought in Professor Daniel as well on this, and he suggested to look at a specific personality disorder and then go from there. And so then I had like a shower of thought, wondering if maybe there was some interplay with viruses and parasites in regards to schizophrenia.
Great. Okay, last question.
Yes.
For now, is so we've done all this research, we've done all this work. Like, if you could take any next steps, what would your next steps be if you're to continue on in this direction?
One thing that I would be interested in is specifically without these environmental factors such as diseases, looking at the genetics of a schizophrenic and its development on in its neurodevelopment. We do know, for example, how to take a skin cell, convert it into a neuron, and then from there we can grow brains. And so that would be one thing I think would be really interesting to look at, is to take the skin sample from someone who is schizophrenic, confirmed schizophrenic, and grow a little brain and see, look at the genetic basis of its neurodevelopment.
Cool. Grow a brain, got it. Next bit.
He wants to grow brains. That's yeah, very cool. Thank you, Jareth. That was really good. Is the correlation between it's an inflammation response that they're saying is the correlation to schizophrenia, right?
In part, that is one of the factors.
So is it inflammation during pregnancy or just at all.
During pregnancy.
So,
Because, I mean, what you're looking at is the effect of the developing embryo.
so I guess one of the treatments then would be if they could find some sort of,
Some way to mitigate the inflammation.
like a vaccine or something before,
The problem with that is when you elicit a vaccine, is you are inducing an immune response. And so, I'm not entirely sure what the solution as far as that goes would be, because you're looking for a way to circumvent a specific immune response where the development of the child.
right, that's what I was asking, if you could have this vaccine prior to pregnancy, right, because you're eliciting the immune response.
Oh, prior to pregnancy, don't see any reason why not.
Right. Are there any treatments suggested towards this, or is it just too early in the stages?
Too early.
Yeah.
Too early, because we can't pin down the mechanisms yet, so there aren't any specific mechanisms. You have correlation, but not any specific mechanism between disease and its development.
Let me just jump in very quickly. This is just a correlation, and is much prevalent among those who are already genetically predisposed
Yes.
to have schizophrenia or suicidal ideation or any of these other mental illnesses. However, I mean, total classes has been there for generations, you know. The only thing we advise patients to do is stay away from cats when you're
Yeah.
pregnant. Yeah, stay away from cats as much as you can, especially the cat feces or cat scratches. You don't
Yeah.
want to come in contact with those when you're pregnant. There's work in the pipeline right now in developing medication, but it has to be, we're using what we call the nanotechnology to be able to have the medication to penetrate the blood-brain barrier to the brain for it to be effective, because this is what affects the brain. So the technology is there, but we are still far away from getting to developing the medication that will be ideal for it. In terms of vaccine, there will be no vaccination associated with it. It just has to be medication that will prevent it from getting to where it is to become, from triggering or the gene for schizophrenia to mutate early and cause schizophrenia in those individuals. But good job, good work.
Thank you.